Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us today for the second session in our Career Talks Online webinar series. Today, we're talking all about managing your online presence. So we're so excited to have you all here today and joining us in this great discussion. My name is Natasha Rigo. I'm the Young Alumni Coordinator with the Alumni Office here at UNB. And of course, we couldn't put on these sessions without the amazing alumni volunteers who lend their advice and their expertise throughout these sessions. So a big thank you to Peter Stoddard and Katie Davey, who you'll meet shortly, for joining us here today. It's really a huge priority for us in the Alumni Office to provide our students with opportunities to learn more about career skills, networking, to feel better prepared for life after UNB as you seek future employment. So we really hope that you leave here today with some good tidbits, some nice advice in terms of managing your online presence and really understanding how you can showcase your personal brand and your professional brand online on things like LinkedIn and your other social media platforms. So before we get started with the discussion today, I just wanted to let you know what the format for this afternoon will be. It will be a panel discussion. So we're talking about various questions that were submitted to us through you, our registrants, about LinkedIn, managing your online presence, like I said, but we will also leave time for any questions that come in live during the session. So we can't see you or hear you, but there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And at any point during the presentation, please feel free to drop any questions you might have for our panelists. And we're happy to get to them at least by the end of the session, if not throughout the presentation. So another thing that I wanted to mention is the event will be recorded. So all of you who registered today will receive a link to this recording after the event is concluded, but it will also live on our website, umb.ca/alumni. So if at any point you feel like you didn't miss or you missed writing down a certain piece of advice, you want to go back and watch the session, it will be available for you. And there's some other career talk sessions that are on our website as well. So if you didn't have a chance to listen to the resumes and interviewing skills, that one is also up on our website, as well as some other sessions that we did previous years. So with that being said, I think we'll jump right into it. I'd love for you to meet our two alumni panelists, Peter Stoddard and Katie Davey. So we'll just have them join here. And I'll just ask Peter and Katie if they could introduce themselves briefly. So just mention what you studied at UNB and what it is that you do in your career. Why don't we start with Peter?
Okay, hi everybody. Thanks for joining today, and thank you to Tash and Mary for having us on today. I graduated from UNBSJ in 1999. I actually started with an arts program, and after my first year, I changed into a BBA and met some incredible friends along the way, which actually led me into a career in restaurant and hospitality business. And I did that for about 25 years, actually. Recently moved on from that. And now I run a small business with my wife doing coaching, consulting, and some online marketing.
Excellent. Thank you, Peter. Katie?
Yeah, thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here. So I graduated from UNB Fredericton in 2017 with a BA in political science, but I too actually started in kinesiology and made the big pivot to political science halfway through, which is a whole other conversation, but really pleased to be here today. I currently am a policy lead at the Public Policy Forum, which is a national nonpartisan independent policy think tank based in Ottawa. But kind of between my time at UNB and now, I've done a couple of interesting things, all really related to this topic, including I was the president of the UNB Student Union from 2015 to 16, I think. Around then. And then I had the real pleasure of working in the New Brunswick Premier's office for about 4 years before returning and doing my master's at Laurier, Master's of Applied Politics, and then again landing here in Ottawa at the Public Policy Forum. So really spend a lot of time, of course, in the policy, advocacy, and political space. So some really interesting kind of tidbits around online presence and some of the intersections in those spaces. But I look forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie. Well, we are so thankful to have you both here today. So again, thank you so much for lending your time and your advice to our students. And obviously you can tell from their career background that they have a lot to add to this topic. So excited to jump right into it. So I thought we would start by talking about LinkedIn, because obviously that is, the professional tool or platform that a lot of people think about. And so I thought we'd start by talking about sort of some of those first easy things that students can do to really set their profile up to display what their professional goals are or what their professional brand is. So Katie, why don't we start with you? What are some of those first easy things that you might recommend students look at?
Yeah, well, I think, especially if you don't have a LinkedIn profile, it's pretty daunting to think about setting it up, especially because there are so many different elements to it and you want to, put your best foot forward right from the beginning. I think, the easiest piece I would say is obviously just adding your experience, and that can be as basic as just the organization and title to start off with. And I would say, as students, you might be thinking to yourself, well, I don't know if I have enough experience to create this LinkedIn profile. But one thing that I've really seen a lot of students do, and I think it's very beneficial, is frankly pulling out the nuggets, whether it's working on a big group project or working with a community organization. That's experience, and you can talk about that on LinkedIn in a really interesting way. I think the other thing is, of course, the professional photo, but that shouldn't be a daunting task either. I'll be honest, my LinkedIn profile picture right now is literally sitting on my deck. We have a nice brick background, so that's really easy. Put on a nice shirt, get a friend or a partner to take a photo of you up against a background with natural light, and there you go, you have your professional photo. So I think those are two really important things. The other thing I would say is it's hard to talk about yourself, and the description piece on LinkedIn is one of the things I had the most trouble with. How do I summarize my goals, or how do I summarize my experience? But I would say, use the tools that are around you. What I actually did was during my master's, and during my undergrad, I did this as well, but I went to the Career Center and, did some of the personality tests and those pieces that are freely available. I know they are at UNB because, as I said, I did them at UNB as well. And what's really interesting about exploring that is you get somebody or some resources that say back to you what your skills are. Mm-hmm. And so my LinkedIn description right now is literally based on my Myers-Briggs profile and what that says that I'm good at and what that says I'm interested in. So, you can use those free tools at your disposal and really take a very daunting task, frankly, and make it easy, and just use the tools that are around you and available to you.
Yeah, that's great. Really good advice. Just your reference of the Career Center. I don't know if all students know that they do have access to those resources and tools on campus. There's the Career Center in Fredericton, and Student Services in St. John, of course, offers those things as well. So yeah, really, really great advice. And same with the professional photo. I mean, we all have iPhones, so like you said, it can be easy to sort of set yourself up that way. Well, that's awesome. It actually leads into our next question that I was going to ask Peter. And it's around that skills and experience. So what would you say to students who might not have a lot of job experience yet, Peter, but how can they translate these skills and experiences that they've learned at UNB onto their LinkedIn profile? What sort of tips would you have for that?
Yeah, it's, I've been on LinkedIn for quite a while now, but more so in the past couple of years as my career has changed. And I kind of realize more so now than ever of exactly that situation. How do I say what I'm doing? And so all the things that Katie said, very relevant, and trying to figure out your own self there. One thing I found is asking for, like, there's a recommendation section on there. And if you have recommendations, whether you have experience or not, it's no different than a reference that somebody doesn't have to search for. It's, you can find out who the recommendation came from, and if it's legitimate in the industry you're looking for. And what a lot of people don't realize is you can actually ask for recommendations, whether it's specifically for someone or put it out there. I find that helps a lot, kind of tell a little bit about your character if you do or do not have any relevant job experience. The other part is this: there's a skill section in there, making sure that you've pulled some of the skills that you've learned at school out, and like Katie said, maybe going through a workshop that can help get someone else pull that out of you, so you can get a bit more detail. Because it is, some people have no problem talking about themselves, but most people have a little bit harder time actually articulating exactly what their skills are.
For sure.
And I think in there, there's actually an assessment, like a skills assessment tool at the bottom of LinkedIn when you go down, and you can do tests. So, even if it's something as simple as Word or PowerPoint, that is a skill, and that's not a skill that everybody has, and it will evaluate you on that. I know this recently because I tried to do the Excel one and failed it. But putting it on there and knowing that you've got that stuff, or you can take a few moments and maybe learn that skill and then add it in there. So there's a few tips anyway to at least not rely so much on experience you don't have, but on pulling out from the things that you do.
Right. Yeah, good point. And I think it's true what you said, like having someone else reaffirm the skills that you have by asking for recommendations, I think is sometimes helpful, because like you both said, what Katie said, it's sometimes hard to talk about ourselves and brag about our skills or our high points. So really good advice there. And just sort of on the same note, Peter, another question for you, maybe from an employer perspective, just based on your experience. Should students or new grads be putting all of their job experience on their LinkedIn profile? Like say they have high school job experience working at fast food or whatever it might be. Should they be putting all of this experience on their profile, or really just focusing on the experiences that relate to the job that they're seeking?
I was kind of on the fence with this one, and so
Yep.
I guess my answer on that would be it depends.
Mm-hmm.
It would depend. I think in this situation that your tenure in that position would be important. If you worked at Harbor Station for 3 weeks during a concert event or something, I'm not sure that that's as relevant as if you were employed there for a year, even if
Right.
it was on a part-time basis. Or if you had a customer service type role, whether it's at Tim Hortons or working at Mark's Warehouse or something like that, that would have some relevant experience, and you only did it for summers, but you did it for a couple of years. I think that it would be important to kind of weigh that, and then again, use that as part of your skill set and add that in there.
Mm-hmm.
Probably like, I used to see a lot of like, oh, I babysat, things like that. I think you need to weigh that a bit too, because if you babysat your little sister, is that, a relevant experience? No. But if you actually developed a babysitting service as a small business and you provided it around, then I think that can, there's skills there that you've used, organizational, accounting, marketing, all the different aspects that would apply to it. So that would probably be another kind of thing to weigh out a bit on the dependent thing. So
yeah,
list out all the things that you did, specifically any skills that you had that you learned out of those jobs. Like even if you blend a bit of them together, a cashier, there's some accounting experience there, end of day reconciliation, things like that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because you can, very easily take some jobs that you had and pull out the relevant skills. Like, for example, one of the jobs I had in high school was as a hostess. Well, you have a great set of relevant skills there by being able to engage with a diverse set of folks, by able to kind of manage a room, being able to kind of manage where you sit people, and just developing some of those more personable skills that are really transferable in a lot of different industries. So as long as you're pulling out some of those relevant skills, and I think what Peter said as well, if you can demonstrate that you were able to do, or that you did a job for a number of years, it does show reliability, and it shows kind of commitment as well, and being able to translate those skills into what your next role will be, I think is really interesting and important to be able to do.
Yeah, for sure. Great advice. I think it's those soft skills you can sort of pull from all those experiences and, really highlight those on LinkedIn as well. So sort of on the flip side of things, just a question about being active on LinkedIn. So even if you're not currently searching for a job, Katie, what would your advice be in terms of how regularly you should be liking and commenting on posts, or making your own posts on LinkedIn? I know you're active on LinkedIn, Katie, but might have some tips about this as well.
Yeah, I think, I'm not currently looking for a job myself, but I'm very active on LinkedIn. And that's because you're always building your network, because you never know, right? You never know when something's going to come up. You never know when your connections are going to, materialize for opportunities. And they don't need to be strictly employment opportunities, right? For example, I assume my presence on LinkedIn is why I was asked to participate in this conversation, right? And those types of opportunities, continue to add and build your skills and also allow you to create networks that you wouldn't be able to otherwise. So, for example, if you attend a talk or something like that and you see a speaker that you really resonate with and you'd love to follow up with them, well, if you have an active LinkedIn presence, you could message them after and say, hey, I would love to connect. I really got value out of X, and then that person's in your network. So that network building component is really important. The other thing that I was recently reflecting on is, you can create a lot of momentum on LinkedIn. So for example, a lot of the pieces of work I do these days are very public facing. And so what that means is, and for example, I do a lot of podcasts and I do a lot of reports and things like that. So what I'm able to do is have my organization actually tag me when they're posting about a podcast we worked on, or when they're posting about a report that we worked together on. And that shows momentum on my LinkedIn, even though I'm not actually posting about it. So that's something that I've recently recognized. But I think, I go on LinkedIn every now and again, and I'll again, posts or comments, and it just keeps your name, frankly, in folks' timelines. And again, that really will build that momentum and show your network what you're doing, and show your network or remind your network, frankly, that you're still there and not to forget about you. And I think that's important at any point in your career.
For sure. Thanks, Katie. I don't know if Peter, you wanted to add anything to that, just in terms of your own activity on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I think it's like Katie said, it's try not to be a big ebb and flow. It's a bit more about being a consistent presence, right? So, whether you check it once a day or 3 times a week, if that's how you're going about it. And again, you do get that momentum, because if you get caught up in a conversation, or, especially if it's irrelevant to your industry type situation, then absolutely. And then it's also how you get found. When other people are looking for you, you show up in those searches. Like, we all know the word algorithm. Well, it all works for and against you. If you're actively involved in real estate, then the more things you touch and comment on in that world, and the more consistent you are, the more that you're liable to pop up in someone else's when they're looking for a career, or if you're selling real estate, or however that relates.
Yeah, and Peter, I think that's a really great point, because again, if you are looking to be in a specific industry, LinkedIn is so great because it has a lot of thought leadership and a lot of, articles that are shared and things like that. So if you just follow, I don't know, AI, right, or something like that, you can see articles that come up and you can just like them, or even comment and say, hey, Natasha, I thought you might like this. And then that simple act, one, gets you in that network and space that you want to be in, and also just, again, kind of keeps you recognized. So I think that's a really great point, Peter.
Yeah, I think you both raised some really good points. I remember you reflecting on this, Katie, and that is how I see your name often on LinkedIn, because you're either liking other people's posts or you're being tagged in some posts. So I thought the piece of advice that you shared for students, if you're attending a session like today's session and you see a post about it afterwards, there's an opportunity to like it and say, hey, I attended this today, great session, or, whatever your feedback is. Yeah, really, really great advice. So now sort of talking a little bit about your brand. I know people sort of toss this word around a little bit. So just for both of you, why is it important to showcase your personal and your professional brand on platforms like LinkedIn? And what are some tips that you might have in terms of understanding what your brand is? Like, how does someone distinguish what their brand might be if they're just starting out? Why don't we start with Peter?
Sure. Yeah, I think I guess when we think about the traditional sense of the term brand, you'd think of iconic brands like Nike or Apple and Coke and Pepsi and all that stuff. But back then, for them to get the type of attention that's garnered now on LinkedIn or any other social profile or TV or anything, if you think that everyone is now a brand, your social media is a huge part of your brand. So if you think of it that way, you'll approach your brand considerably different than if you're just like, oh, I'm just a person on here. Because I guess tips for understanding your brand, what's your voice? Like how are you going to speak to people? Like I know Katie has a pretty distinct brand on there, and how she interacts, especially on LinkedIn. Are you going to be self-deprecating? Are you going to be funny? Are you going to be serious? These are, like maybe you're going to be super philosophical, and that's sort of your brand. Other things to consider, what are you passionate about? If you're going to be, like for me, I'm passionate about the outdoors, so a bit of that comes through on my personal brand. And I'm going to talk to that a little bit. I'm knowledgeable in that aspect, but there's other things on your brand side of things that what am I knowledgeable about? Like, what is my industry? If I'm in marketing, I'm going to talk about marketing because that's a bit of my brand. Like in my previous career in the restaurant world, I was sort of always talking about things in the restaurant world, anything that would relate, whether it was on a national, provincial, global scale, talking about all the things that interact with that. So I kind of created that brand, which was me, but it was based on those sort of three parameters. So I think it's a big part of understanding that what your brand and your voice and your passions and what you're knowledgeable about are, and remembering that the job that you have today, and certainly in my experience, isn't the job that you're going to have forever. So there's elements of that brand that are going to stick with you, and then other ones that are going to evolve as you grow and change throughout your career.
Yeah. Thanks, Peter.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question. And what I would say is a couple of things. One, you're probably going to get competing advice on building kind of online brands or personal brands, because everyone does it slightly different, right? And I think for me, the biggest thing, because I've frankly been working at this and trying to answer this question for a number of years now, and I would say I've learned kind of three things. The first is that your online brand doesn't have to be static, right? So for example, one area that I spent a lot of time and still have a big passion for it, but spent a lot of time working on and putting out into the world was gender and politics. So that's still something that people will come to me about, and by media and otherwise, which is excellent. But what happened to me is I actually kind of almost niched down too much. So what it meant is that people would only come to me to talk about, gender and politics, when my expertise is much broader than that. And so I had to work pretty hard actually to pull myself kind of out of that specific niche and try to make those broader connections. And I've done a pretty good job at that, I think, over the last number of years. But that was something that I did experience by niching down too much. I pigeonholed myself into one area, and that was not ideal, but I did develop that expertise, and it still sticks. The other thing I would say is you can also mimic in some ways people's brands that you see, elements of their brands, not their entire brand, but elements of tools that they use effectively that you like or that resonate with you. So one actually thing on LinkedIn, it's not a brand piece per se, but a person that I think has a really great profile, in their job description pieces, they actually just start by quoting the mission of the organization. So I thought that was really useful, because then they're kind of associating themselves in some way with those missions, and that helps to build, again, your brand in some ways. The third thing I would say is you have to practice. So I did start a podcast 2.5 years ago, I think, that was specifically on the question of gender and politics. And I was terrified when I put out my first episode, literally like knots in my stomach, like, sweaty palms, like, oh my God, I'm hitting publish. I'm so nervous, publish. Now I've, done over 100 podcasts in a number of different platform, or with a number of different podcasts, and I don't even think twice about it now. I publish something and I don't even think twice about it. But that, I think, is really applicable here, because it is a little bit scary to be putting your opinions out online and to be putting out, your thoughts and reflecting on different pieces. But you have to practice, and that's the only way you'll get better at it, and that's the only way you'll be able to kind of build that personal brand. If you kind of sit back and just watch everything that's happening, you just won't be able to kind of hone that in.
Yeah, well, that's excellent. Thank you both. Really, really good advice. And I think one thing that you both sort of mentioned indirectly was that it kind of starts with your passions. Like if you're having trouble really understanding what your brand is, start with the things that you're interested in and also what your goals are for your career. And, you know, you can sort of model your brand off that and go from there. So yeah, thank you. So another question just about LinkedIn before we wrap up sort of this section is, in what ways, what would your tips, I guess, be for students to connect with people in their field on LinkedIn to seek job opportunities? If either of you wanted to jump in and answer that question.
Sure. I think that starting to connect with people in the industry, it's never been easier to network digitally or period, right? Especially for the last couple of years, it's been very difficult. There hasn't been those opportunities to go to the network mixers, but just start connecting with people in the industry or following people and following pages that are in that industry that you're interested in getting into. That again, we talked about it earlier, but like the algorithm will start to show you more opportunities there, and that can like I think Katie mentioned earlier, it's kind of snowballs, right? So you get some momentum there, and then you're like, oh, okay, well, I didn't realize that was there. I didn't realize, and then putting that you're open to work or you're open to certain things on there allows other people to maybe connect with you or what your interests are. And oh, okay, well, that's I didn't realize that they had an interest in construction. So however you want to get into that, or marketing, or whatever the industry might be. Another thing that I have a friend of mine that's very active on LinkedIn and gets headhunted, and so I asked her a bit of strategy on that, and she said if you're comfortable, which not everybody is, but doing a video, like putting a video talking about what you're passionate about, what your skill sets are, what you're looking for, your goals, especially when you're first starting your career, because maybe you don't have a bunch of that road rash that comes with 10 years or 20 years in the workforce, but that's kind of what you're looking to learn. And in a short video, and in today's world, as we all know, everything's kind of gone to video. You can put it in your profile, you can put it in a post. She actually uses it to send with her. She puts it on YouTube and uses it on her resume. So when she actually sends it in, she'll even fine tune it for whatever the position is she's looking for. Again, it's you have to be comfortable doing that, but or maybe if you're comfortable enough to force yourself to do that, like Katie said about being super nervous first time you do a podcast, but after you put 10 or 15 or 20 of these videos together, maybe the last one's much better than the first one. And that's just the evolution of people as they get more experienced with things. But anyway, I do think a big point of that is don't be nervous. Don't be like, oh, I don't want to connect with this person at Irving because I don't know them, but I do really want to work in that department. Just connect and reach out.
Yeah, I love that. I love that
Totally.
tip about the video.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm now reflecting on that kind of personally as well. But I would totally agree. I think I regularly get folks that reach out to me that are, maybe in kind of fourth year political science or in a master's, who are interested in kind of the career path I've taken, and I've never said no to connecting with somebody. So I think, are you going to be able to have an informational interview with the CEO of Irving Oil? Probably not, but you totally could reach out to folks in those spaces and in those departments that you're interested in, and just say, I thought your LinkedIn profile was really interesting. I'd love to understand what your career path has looked like, and then again, snowball, I guess, will be the word of the session, but you can ask them to connect you with others as well, and just use those kind of networking opportunities to just build that out. But like I said, very rarely have seen or heard of people that say no to those, again, authentic requests to connect.
Yeah. And I know if anyone here attended the resume session, you'll know we mentioned this in that one as well, but connecting with other UNB alumni is a really great first step. People like Peter and Katie, because you share that connection of going to UNB, and so it's also a conversation starter. If you see an alum who's maybe working in a career that you're interested in, why not start there and connect with them? So yeah, great advice.
Yep.
So I think we'll switch over to talking a little bit about some other online presence tools, I guess, other than LinkedIn. And I have a question for you, Katie, wondering if it's okay to have a personal profile that's not shifted towards a professional brand, or if every profile that you make, like all of your social media accounts, should be part of this reputation. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, if I reflect on that personally, my LinkedIn and my Twitter are kind of my more professional spaces. But I do have, a Facebook and an Instagram, and in those places, I again would say they're a little bit more geared towards personal. But overall, like I'm not, I'm not saying anything on my Facebook or my Instagram that I would be worried about if an employer kind of came across it. It's more like, posting about my cat or about my like winter skiing, like whatever, right? Like kind of more personal things. I'm not posting things that I would be worried about if an employer came across, but I'm also, balancing sometimes, especially on Facebook, I will still post reports that I've written or things like that, but it's just not for me as kind of stressful to kind of keep that personal brand. I would say also, I do use the I guess privacy tools available on those platforms as well. My Facebook is not totally open. It's, a bit more limited because it is a more personal space. But I think, just kind of having a bit of a strategy where you decide which profile is kind of what, and then, do you accept your boss if they add you as a friend on Facebook? Maybe, maybe not, depending on, how you decide that profile should be. But I think it's just about balance. And again, we all know we've all grown up with technology now, like anything you do online is public. And so as long as you kind of have that in the back of your mind, I think you can kind of balance that.
Yeah, good point. Thank you. And sort of on the same realm, I guess, Peter, from an employer perspective, or from your experience in the restaurant industry, are employers looking at social media activity on these various platforms like Facebook and Instagram when they're considering someone for a job? Do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, I would say that your social media presence online is actually more of a reflection and probably more heavily researched and probably carries more weight than references would these days. A lot of the time when, how many times are you going to put forward somebody's name to give you a personal reference? It's not going to give you a good reference, right? Mm-hmm. Versus if I want to know what somebody's like, I'm going to immediately go to every social platform I have access to just, sometimes it's a general, or depending on the position, right? Maybe it's a general review of, what they're into and that they're posting, and, is it understanding their personal brand, and or if they're heavy community involvement or things like that. So yeah, I would say definitely, and be conscious of what you post. Because it is again, that's your personal brand. So putting, partying on a Friday night, if you're, depending on the party, obviously, but you need to be conscious of what's going online. Is on there forever, never comes off, right? So, but yes, don't go under the illusion that nobody checks your social media when they're looking to hire you. It's probably the first thing they do before the interview, and then probably a much thorough dive when they're considering you to be hired, for sure. Yeah.
Good to know. Yeah. And I think it sort of touches on what Katie said too, of just to have that balance and to kind of decide which profiles are your professional. And then, like you said, Peter, to be aware of what you're posting on your other accounts. Yeah.
And it is a bit of a two-way street too, because if you're once you've gone for the interview and who the person is or the organization, it gives you an opportunity to see if your values align with what you're getting into as well. True. So it is something to consider as a two-way street.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So talking about sort of our online profiles and what we portray maybe on our more personal accounts, What are your tips for showcasing volunteer experience maybe on our profiles, or should this only be for LinkedIn, or would you recommend adding any of these experiences to our more personal profiles like Instagram and whatnot? Katie, did you have any tips for that?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think for me personally, I mostly focus my professional experience on LinkedIn and on Twitter. And that is just basically like many industries do not use Twitter, but the industry that I'm in does, and it uses it very heavily. And I would say, again, I get more opportunities, again, whether it's speaking roles, whether it's collaboration, et cetera, from Twitter than any other platform. That's not going to be the case in every industry. Some would be more heavily Facebook based, some more heavily LinkedIn based. So because of that, my Twitter really is anything I do, volunteer, personal, well, not so much personal, some personal, to humanize me, of course, no. But yeah, like volunteer, et cetera, personal, podcast reports, interviews, everything goes on Twitter. And it, again, it's the same principles as LinkedIn, right? It's showing momentum and continuing to kind of build that. So a lot of my volunteer activities do link up a little bit with my, broad brand and interest. So that makes a lot of sense. But they can be, volunteer activities can be as simple as, volunteering at an event and helping with setup and, speaker prep and all that stuff. And again, that's great because you can say like, it was so great to be at this event today, and here's what I learned and here's what I took away. That's a great way to showcase a, afternoon volunteer experience. But it also, again, can show your personal interest. So I don't know if you volunteer at the SPCA, for example, like, again, that's great to showcase and share. And it's just, again, being intentional about how you do that and highlighting, continuing to highlight the momentum that you're around, you're doing things, and just, appropriately sharing those on the right platforms.
Yeah. Keeping your name top of mind too. If people see you that you're out in the community volunteering, I think that's always a plus too when you go out searching for a job or looking for new opportunities. So sort of on the same realm, I guess, Peter, when you're using these platforms, like a lot of them they're fun, these apps. Instagram is fun, Instagram stories, Facebook. So what sort of tips would you have for maintaining a professional appearance on those sort of apps while still being able to show your personal life and, enjoy the pleasure of social media apps?
Yeah, I mean, I learned a long time ago about what we refer to as the 15-minute rule. So, because a lot of the times, especially in any type of passionate situation, some people just can't hold back and write and get on there. And then, after 5 minutes, like, oh my God, I can't believe I wrote that, or put something on there. And already somebody screenshot it and sent it on somewhere else. And, It's kind of like I said, everything is on there forever. So, as soon as you hit post or send, that's been sent. So if there's a situation that you're unsure of, if, whether you're voicing your opinion about something, or you're at a party, or you're at an event and you're not sure if you should want to post a picture with a certain person or whatever that looks like, obviously asking permissions and things like that. But if you're not sure, and I like to follow what I call my little man, your conscience that sits on your shoulder. If there's something doesn't feel right, then wait 15 minutes. And if it still doesn't feel right, then it's probably not. And if you're like, oh yeah, okay, that'll make sense, and then and kind of go ahead. And that just allows you to just, give yourself a minute, because it is so instantaneous, right? And something that can be so instantaneous doesn't necessarily give you that time to think through the full repercussions of what you're about to post. Even if it's something that maybe you're really passionate about, typically kind of how you get into some of those difficult situations. But anyway, I would recommend the 15-minute rule and listen to your little man that sits on your shoulder and kind of whispers, okay, well, maybe you should put that on there. So
good point. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. I will say, and not necessarily counter to that, because I totally agree. And I'm sometimes bad for that in the morning when I read the news and I immediately want to, retweet or reply with something because I'm angry about it, but gotten better at that. The one thing though, again, like when we, developing your personal brand, you have to be comfortable with where that lands you in some ways. And so what I mean by that, I often will call out on social media manels, so panels that are, all men. And that means that there are a couple of people that I have called out that don't like that I did that and don't want to work with me. And that's okay with me, because again, if a person can't be self-reflective enough to, I'm not calling it out. Well, I am calling it out negatively because it is negative. But like, I have to live with that decision, right? And I have to be kind of confident in my own brand and advocacy and values to say, I'm okay to say this. And that does mean that there are some people that might not want to work with me, but that's okay, because I probably don't want to work with them either if that's going to be an issue, right? But I think there's a balance, right? You want to make sure that you're confident in your positions and confident in what your values are if you do put them out in the world, because it could have negative repercussions and you do have to live with what those are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's again part of developing your personal brand. Here's me, this is how I operate. So it's not necessarily about holding back. It's saying, here's my stance, and this is me. And I think being authentic and genuine is probably the most important thing, right? Like, not saying something when you want to, or saying something when you don't want to, is all part of your authenticity. And that bleeds through the screen big time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Totally agree. So obviously when we think of professional groups or organizations, online, we tend to think of LinkedIn because that's where most people are. But do you have any other suggestions for professional groups or maybe organizations that students and new grads could join to sort of get into this networking world? Any that either of you have used?
I would say, like, there's typically some type of association available for every industry, or multiple, right? Depending on what it is. So, again, use real estate, there's lots of different associations there's a Canadian Real Estate Board. There's, so when you are trying to go beyond just an online presence, when you start following things like, associations, there's different networking groups too, I think. Following leaders in those industries, or connecting with them, and following pages, same thing. The algorithm, you start to get a bit of that momentum, and that can project you into that industry, and maybe there's learning tools in there and some training things, and there's, opens up the door to maybe one of these webinars, or another online marketing effort, or maybe more so these days in person, which is kind of starting to come back online, and there's lots of interesting stuff. I don't know if Katie, you have some other stuff to add to that.
Yeah, I would agree. Like, of course, if there are industry associations or groups in your space, figuring out how to kind of get involved with those, either by or joining rather groups, or attending events, that's great. I think, I personally like to follow like the local chambers of commerce and, different pages like that, to just see what's kind of going on in the community and try to understand a bit of the space that I'm in. I think obviously also, UNB does have LinkedIn groups, and kind of connecting up with different communities that you're engaged in, not necessarily directly professional, but that has a large professional network that you can kind of be connected into is really helpful and valuable as well. And just really, finding the spaces that the people you want to be in are in, and figuring out ways to kind of link up with those.
Yeah, great advice. Yeah, I think a lot of those pages that both of you mentioned is a great place to start, even if it is a page or a group on LinkedIn. So if it's attached to your passion or your career interest, then what a great place to start connecting with people that have similar interests. So thank you both for that. That's awesome. So I wanted to move into just a few questions. We've got about 15 minutes left, and there were a few questions that were pre-submitted to us by some of the registrants today. And also just a reminder to the students here right now, if you did have a question that you wanted answered live, feel free to drop it in the Q&A box and we can get to that too. But just to start, we did have a question that came in from someone, and they're wondering how they should add details of work that they've had at 2 different organizations that might seem like a conflict of interest, but they're not. And they're curious if you have any advice for how to go about that. Would either of you have some advice or suggestions?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And, I'll say I have an acquaintance, for example, who actually worked at like an environmental organization focused on affordable housing, and then moved over to a developer actually. And she asked herself that question, but the role she took on at the developer was I can't remember the exact role, but kind of like a director of sustainability or ESG type role. And really how she got into that organization was actually just really seeing that where they wanted to go and their values really did align with her values, and she was going to be able to, in that organization, build that value set for this organization that might be slightly not exactly in parallel to her other experience. And I think really that comes back to getting specific about what your goals and your passions and your employment goals are, and just articulating that, right? So, again, if it's in the environmental space, you could just articulate that, you're an environmental leader that looks to work with organizations who want to expand their expertise in that space, and kind of that work within type narrative. So you can very easily describe what you're trying to do. That helps demonstrate what those organizations might do, and how that kind of path has developed. Again, I really love, as I say, adding the mandate or the mission of an organization in that like LinkedIn post, and kind of being able to draw those conclusions. But yeah, I think just being honest and articulate about what your goals and values are and how it actually does align with what the career path you've taken is.
Yeah, good point. Peter, did you have anything to add to that one?
I guess things that you could, I agree 100% with Katie. I think that's a great approach. You can pull other pieces out of both of those jobs too, and highlight the experiences, because especially like even in this case, you're going to have similar skills, even though there may be conflicting personal value stuff involved, but there's certainly organizational skills and design, engineering, whatever it might be, that you can pull out and also sprinkle those into your LinkedIn profile.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So we had another question come in about looking for job openings. So this person is wondering what you recommend for getting in touch with potential employers without badgering them and annoying them about job openings. I think we touched on a few of the things in terms of just reaching out or liking pages that have similar interests and whatnot. But maybe if one of you wanted to expand on that question a little bit.
Sure. Well, I have a couple points on that. Is I like to use the word persistent instead of badger, because I always admire people that are persistent. And I think the fine line between persistent and badger is following proper channels, like proper communication channels. If you're being hired under a certain department, you don't necessarily go to the CEO or vice versa. And you're kind of, okay, well, I've got I've discovered what the proper communication channel is. Wait until the job if you're applying for a specific job, wait till the closing date to follow up, right? Like, okay, you've sent it in, you've got the confirmation that they have your application. Don't start following up 3 days before the closing of the job posting, because that just that might create a bit of animosity on the recruiter's side of things. So being conscious of that. And then I guess at some point, you still want to keep your foot in the door for potential, if you're not successful in that application, for potential stuff down the road. So at some point you have to say, okay, well, somebody else got that job. Congratulations to them. Maybe I hope to work with you someday, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great advice.
Yeah, I think, I would just echo, if it's, an organization broadly that you really want to work for whatever reason. One, if you follow them on LinkedIn, you'll probably get notifications when they're hiring. I also love, again, I'm not looking for a job, but I go on LinkedIn all the time to see the jobs that are recommended to me, just to get a sense of, industries or organizations that I actually didn't really even know of, and kind of what types of roles are developing in my space and sector. Because LinkedIn is actually great for that. They'll match your profile up with what jobs are actually available. So if you just keep your eye on that, that's really useful. But I would also say you have to be explicit. So if you do have an informational interview with somebody or an organization and you want to work there, you have to say, I would really love to work in this organization, and it would be fantastic if you could follow up with me if a job becomes available. Because if you just, have it, oh, that's so cool, this is a great place, like they're not going to follow up with you because they don't know that you are explicitly interested in opportunities. So you just have to actually make the direct ask as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it actually kind of leads into the next question too, in terms of setting up your LinkedIn profile to really show what it is you're seeking. This person has asked what the best way is to write your About You section on LinkedIn. But not just that, also the headline. I think these are two really great places where you can put this information. Would either of you want to expand on how you personally write your About You section on LinkedIn? Maybe Katie?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly have to go and look at, I don't even know what it says right now, to be honest.
I struggle with mine on the daily.
It's probably worth updating. Yeah. Oh yeah. Like I update mine regularly because I'm like, I don't know, should I say this? Should I say this? But one thing, especially for students, like partner up with somebody and say, write my about section and I'll write yours, and see what somebody else says about you. Because again, it's kind of hard to articulate your own skills. And so if you hear back what somebody thinks those are, you can use that as a starting point. I think that's a really interesting piece. And I think it's just, again, striking the right tone. I think mine right now is like pretty aspirational. But, if you're a new, and that's, again, I'm not looking for an opportunity, but if you are a new grad and you are being, again, very specific about the industry and the space you want to occupy and what your skills are, is a good starting point. Just really literally kind of bulleting that out and then figuring out how to kind of draft a paragraph about that.
Yep.
Yeah, Peter? I think that's a very very great exercise to do, is have someone else kind of reflect it back to you. Because again, it is very difficult to write things about yourself, and other people's perception of you can be very valuable, right? Things that you didn't even realize about yourself. I would say that, obviously you want to introduce yourself to a certain extent, on a personal and professional level. Maybe put in a few of your achievements, especially if they're significant. Adding probably some of your high level skills stuff. You might put in some of your hobbies and interests, just to tell you a little bit about, tell everybody a little bit about your personal side. One big thing on this one was make sure that you edit it thoroughly and that there's not grammatical errors in it, because, and I'm sure if you went and read mine right now, I'm sure that there probably is some. So I say that knowing that I got to go back and do that, but I know from reading others that it's very distracting, and the last thing you want is someone's perception of you to be, oh my God, they can't even put a comma in the right place or spell a word improperly, or so. Because just be conscious of the grammatics. Yeah.
Because it is sort of people's first impression of you on LinkedIn is that about you section. I know we did some other career talk sessions, I believe it was last year, on LinkedIn, and one of the things that was brought up is how LinkedIn uses keywords. They pull keywords into their algorithms too, in terms of showing you job postings and showing you other people. So like for myself, I have event planner, writer, and just some of the key terms that I guess represent who I am and what kind of career I want or have. So that would be another tip there. Just one last question, actually. I don't see any other ones coming in through the Q&A box, but I think this is an interesting one for our current context, where a lot of people are now working from home, and we see working from home or hybrid models happening probably far into the future. So in terms of that location section on your profile that says where you live, should people be putting like I live in New Brunswick, or should they be leaving it open so that they are looked at as an opportunity to work from home for a remote company. I don't know if either of you have faced that in your own careers or in hiring.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I actually am literally just closing a position where I'm hiring somebody remote, but they have to be based in the Atlantic provinces. That's because it's one of my hats is leading our Atlantic initiative. And so I'm hiring somebody who has to be based in the Atlantic provinces. But LinkedIn actually in their job post didn't let me select like all Atlantic provinces. I would have had to do, New Brunswick or Nova Scotia or Canada remote. But what I experienced from that is a number of people applied that were not from the Atlantic provinces, and we screened them out basically. So, I think so many organizations are doing really different things right now. I think you could have your location in your bio or in the location setting. But again, in that about you section, maybe you write that you're interested in remote opportunities or interested in other opportunities. Because I think, frankly, LinkedIn actually hasn't caught up to that yet as far as how they actually connect. So I think, again, being explicit and also understanding too, if you are applying for an organization, what their new structure might be and how that aligns as well with your interests, because I think we still haven't seen how things are going to unfold on that, but I think LinkedIn actually hasn't caught up yet with how to appropriately connect that dot.
Yeah, it is still such a new thing, but will probably become part of the future of work. I don't know, Peter, you had anything to add there, or if that covered
Not
it for
really.
you?
I think I'd echo the same things. I think Katie probably has a bit more experience in that world as well. I think the whole world is open up now to work. I guess it depends a bit on the type of work that you do. Obviously, some things are regional or very specific to your town or city. Other ones you can live anywhere. I know some folks that work for companies here that moved to Bermuda, and that it doesn't matter where they are. So in seeking jobs, if it's software development or accounting or things that you can as long as you've got a connection, you can work anywhere, which is so crazy to think of. Even 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. Certainly not when I was in university would I'd consider that, but and I think that's probably a big reason where we're getting a lot of people move here, is you don't have to live in those big city centers, and you can have a bit better or bigger, broader quality of life, and without the hustle and bustle. And I think that's kind of what we spoke about earlier, working from home or working in a place like U Station or Trinity or remote office centers. That it's really changing the way, and I don't see it reversing to exactly the way it was. That's a new face of work. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how things progress. And of course, for students, it's a great opportunity to have more opportunities worldwide, to be able to tap into various organizations and companies and, really expand your reach. We did just have one question come in, so I will take a moment to answer that. Sahil is wondering how to stay focused on social media when you have so much information that's flowing in. That's a really great question. There is so much hitting us on social media these days. Any tips for Sahil? How to stay focused?
They don't share disinformation. But it's true. Like it's with so much information, it is actually challenging to know where reputable sources are, and especially if you're trying to get into a space that is a bit more new and evolving, you want to make sure that you're engaging with and sharing information that is factually based and from reputable sources. And I think some platforms are worse than others. So Twitter and Facebook, for example, it's much easier to accidentally engage with content that might not be as reputable. I think LinkedIn that's not really an issue. But I think, again, it's just making sure you're focused, making sure you know your goals and priorities, and not getting too sidetracked in what is a very, very overwhelming space for sure.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. It's maybe when you're going to spend time, it is for the most part a social element. So you have to kind of treat it like it's a social element. It's not, it's not the first 3 hours of your workday. It's not the last 3 hours of your workday. It has a time and place. So, use it that way.
Excellent. Well, that is the end of our session. We're at 2:01, so just a minute past. I just want to say a huge thank you to you, Peter and Katie, for participating today. It was so excellent to hear your advice and your expertise. And I know that our students are leaving here with some valuable information today. So really, really appreciate you taking the time. It's been a pleasure. And just
Happy
a huge
Yeah,
thank you guys. And it's a thank you to all the students too who participated today. If you did have any questions, please feel free to reach out to our office at any time. We're happy to help support you in your career goals. And like I said, this session has been recorded, so it will be posted on our website, and keep an eye on your email as well, because we will send out a recording link to everyone. And we hope to see you again at our next session. So thanks so much, everyone, and hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Katie.